The massive crystalline spires of Drakmor Academy pierced the violet sky like frozen lightning, their surfaces reflecting the twin suns that bathed the dragon homeworld in perpetual amber twilight. Marcus Chen pressed his face against the transport's viewport, watching the alien architecture grow larger as they descended. At 16, he was the youngest human ever accepted into the prestigious institution, and certainly the only orphan from the slums of New Terra. The other passengers on the transport gave him suspicious looks. 3 young Drakmari nobles, their scales gleaming with genetic perfection, whispered among themselves in their melodic native tongue. Marcus caught enough words to understand they were discussing his presence with obvious disdain. He pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in his stomach. When the transport docked, Marcus gathered his single bag and followed the stream of new students toward the academy's main entrance. The Drakmari moved with natural grace, their humanoid forms elegant despite their reptilian features. Each carried themselves with the confidence of beings born to rule, their crests held high and their talons clicking against the crystal walkways in perfect rhythm. Marcus stumbled slightly as he tried to match their pace, drawing more disapproving glances. A Drakmari female with silver scales and piercing blue eyes looked him up and down before speaking in accented standard. "Lost, human? The servant quarters are in the lower levels." Her companions laughed, the sound like wind chimes in a storm. Marcus felt his cheeks burn but said nothing. He had learned long ago that words rarely helped in situations like this. Instead, he focused on the massive doors ahead, carved with intricate depictions of ancient dragon battles. Inside the academy's great hall, hundreds of students milled about beneath a domed ceiling that displayed a real-time view of the cosmos. Star charts shifted and rotated overhead, showing the vast expanse of the Drakmari Empire. At the hall's center stood a massive holographic display showing the Academy's crest, a dragon's head surrounded by 7 stars. "Welcome, young warriors, to Drakmor Academy." The voice boomed across the hall, causing everyone to fall silent. A towering Drakmari with deep crimson scales and battle scars across his snout approached the central platform. His presence commanded immediate respect. "I am Commander Thexbar, and, for the next 4 years, this institution will forge you into leaders worthy of the Dragon Fleet." Marcus listened as Commander Thexbar explained the Academy's purpose. The Drakmari Empire faced threats from across the galaxy, from the insectoid hive minds of the Outer Rim to the machine intelligence known as the Convergence. Only the strongest, most capable minds would be selected to command the Empire's vast fleets and protect trillions of lives. "You will be divided into squadrons," Thexbar continued. "Each squadron will compete in tactical simulations, combat training, and leadership exercises. Only those who prove themselves capable of command will graduate. The rest will find other ways to serve the Empire." A holographic list appeared above the crowd, showing squadron assignments. Marcus searched for his name among the flowing Drakmari script until he found it, Squadron Zeta 7. He noted the names of his squadmates and felt his heart sink. They were all from noble houses, their family names carrying centuries of military tradition. The squadrons were called forward one by one to meet their training officers. When Squadron Zeta 7 was announced, Marcus found himself standing with 5 Drakmari who looked at him like he was contaminating their air. Their training officer, a stern female named Captain Valterra, examined them with critical eyes. "Interesting," she said, her gaze lingering on Marcus. "A human. This should prove educational." The first weeks at Drakmor were brutal. Marcus struggled to keep up with the physical training, his human physiology no match for Drakmari's strength and endurance. In tactical simulations, his squadmates deliberately excluded him from planning sessions, forcing him to guess at strategies during exercises. When they failed missions, which happened frequently without proper coordination, they blamed him for their poor performance. "The human holds us back," complained Zexthal, a green-scaled noble whose family controlled 3 star systems. "His kind are not meant for command. They lack the predator instinct necessary for true leadership." Captain Valterra observed these dynamics but said nothing. During individual evaluations, she would ask Marcus probing questions about the failed missions, but never offered guidance on how to improve his situation. Marcus began to suspect this was intentional, that his presence was some kind of test or political statement he didn't understand. The breaking point came during a complex fleet engagement simulation. Squadron Zeta-7 was tasked with defending a civilian convoy from raiders while managing limited resources and unpredictable enemy movements. Marcus tried to contribute tactical suggestions based on human military history he had studied, but his squadmates dismissed him outright. "Silence, mammal," hissed Coirantha, a silver-scaled female whose crest flared with irritation. "Your primitive species barely managed to leave their homeworld. What could you possibly know about space combat?" The simulation began, and Marcus watched helplessly as his squadron made obvious tactical errors. They spread their forces too thin, failed to establish proper communication protocols, and ignored the convoy's defensive capabilities. The raiders, controlled by advanced AI, exploited every weakness ruthlessly. Within 20 minutes, half the convoy was destroyed and their squadron's flagship was crippled. Captain Valterra terminated the simulation and faced the group with cold disapproval. "Explain this failure," she demanded. Zexthal immediately pointed at Marcus. "The human's presence disrupts our natural cohesion. We cannot function properly with such a foreign element in our ranks." "Interesting theory," Valterra replied. "Human cadet, step forward." Marcus approached, expecting punishment or dismissal. Instead, Valterra activated a private communication channel and spoke quietly. "Tell me, Cadet Chen, what would you have done differently?" Marcus hesitated. Speaking honestly might make his situation worse, but lying seemed pointless. The convoy had defensive platforms that could have been repositioned to create overlapping fields of fire. And the enemy formation suggested they were using pack tactics, which means they would have vulnerable flanks if we could force them to commit to a single attack vector. Valterra's eyes narrowed with interest. "Show me." A tactical display appeared between them, showing the battle's opening moments. Marcus began moving ship icons, explaining how proper coordination between the convoy's defenses and their squadron could have created a killing field for the raiders. His analysis was thorough and innovative, using unconventional tactics that played to human strengths in asymmetric warfare. "Fascinating," Valterra murmured. "And your squadmates never heard these suggestions?" "They don't listen to me, ma'am." Captain Valterra studied Marcus for a long moment, then addressed the entire squadron. "Cadet Chen will be given individual command training. The rest of you will continue as before." The announcement sent shockwaves through the squadron. In Drakmari culture, singling out an individual for special attention was either a great honor or a prelude to expulsion. Given Marcus's status, his squadmates assumed the worst and treated the decision as confirmation of their superiority. Marcus's individual training began immediately. Captain Valterra introduced him to advanced tactical scenarios that had stumped Drakmari strategists for generations. She presented him with historical battles, resource management challenges, and complex diplomatic situations that required creative solutions. To Marcus's surprise, he excelled. His human perspective, shaped by a species that had survived through adaptation rather than domination, provided unique insights into problems that pure aggression couldn't solve. He learned to think in terms of asymmetric advantages, turning weaknesses into strengths and finding victory through unexpected approaches. "Your species," Valterra observed during one session, "has an unusual relationship with hierarchy. Most sentient races develop rigid command structures. Humans seem more flexible." Marcus nodded. "We've always had to be. On Earth, the strongest predators usually weren't the biggest or most aggressive. They were the ones that could adapt fastest to changing conditions. And yet your squadmates see this adaptability as weakness." "They see everything human as weakness, ma'am." Valterra's expression became thoughtful. "Perhaps it is time to test that assumption." The next major exercise involved a massive multi-squadron operation. 3 squadrons would work together to capture a heavily fortified enemy position while protecting civilian populations in the surrounding area. It was the kind of complex, multi-layered challenge that separated future commanders from ordinary officers. Squadron Zeta-7 was assigned a supporting role, which suited Marcus's squadmates perfectly. They could follow orders without having to think creatively or adapt to unexpected situations. Marcus was given observer status, officially there to learn but not to participate in actual command decisions. The operation began smoothly. Alpha and Beta squadrons advanced according to plan while Zeta 7 maintained communication relays and protected supply lines. The enemy AI, however, had been programmed with new adaptive algorithms that learned from previous engagements. It began using unconventional tactics that disrupted the standard Drachmarie approach. Within hours, both lead squadrons were bogged down in fierce fighting. Their commanders, trained in traditional dragon tactics, struggled to adapt to an enemy that refused to follow expected patterns. Casualties mounted as the AI exploited every weakness in their rigid formations. Marcus watched the tactical displays with growing alarm. He could see patterns in the enemy's behavior that the Drachmarie commanders were missing. The AI wasn't just defending randomly, it was deliberately creating conditions that would maximize Drachmarie casualties while preserving its own forces. "Captain," Marcus said quietly to Valterra, "the enemy is using our own tactics against us." "Explain." Marcus highlighted movement patterns on the display. Drachmarie strategy emphasizes honor and direct confrontation. The AI has learned this and is baiting our commanders into situations where those traits become liabilities. Every time they try to engage honorably, they're walking into prepared kill zones. "And you have an alternative?" "Yes, ma'am. But it would require unconventional methods." Valterra studied the deteriorating situation. Alpha Squadron had lost 30% of its strength, and Beta Squadron was requesting immediate reinforcement. Following standard protocol would mean sending Zeta 7 into the same meat grinder. "Show me your plan," she said. Marcus activated a secondary display and began outlining his strategy. Instead of reinforcing the frontal assault, he proposed using Zeta 7's support role as camouflage for a completely different approach. They would appear to be following standard protocols while actually positioning themselves for an unexpected flanking maneuver. "The enemy expects us to think like Drachmarie," Marcus explained. "But what if we thought like humans instead?" His plan was audacious and risky. It involved abandoning traditional command structures, using civilian areas as cover rather than avoiding them, and coordinating with local resistance elements that Drachmarie doctrine typically ignored. Most controversially, it required appearing to retreat while actually advancing, a concept that challenged everything the dragon warriors had been taught about honor and courage. Captain Valterra listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When Marcus finished, she stood motionless for several long minutes while battle reports continued to pour in from the failing frontal assault. Finally, she activated her command authority. "Squadron Zeta 7, prepare for immediate deployment. Cadet Chen, you have tactical command." The announcement stunned everyone in the command center. Marcus's squadmates stared in disbelief as their human teammate was given authority over their noble-born squad. Several started to protest, but Valterra's cold glare silenced them immediately. "You will follow Cadet Chen's orders precisely," she commanded. "Any deviation will result in immediate expulsion from this academy." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a physical force. 5 Drachmarie lives were now in his hands, along with the success or failure of the entire operation. He took a deep breath and activated the squadron's communication channel. "Zeta 7, this is Chen. I know this is unusual, but we have a mission to complete. I need everyone to trust me, just for the next few hours." The responses were mixed. Some squadmates acknowledged curtly, while others remained silent. Marcus could feel their resentment and doubt through the comm channel, but he pushed forward anyway. The operation required perfect timing and coordination, there was no room for personal conflicts. The first phase involved a staged withdrawal that made Zeta 7 appear to be retreating from the combat zone. Marcus had them transmit false casualty reports and request emergency evacuation, all while secretly repositioning for the actual assault. The deception worked perfectly. The enemy AI reduced pressure on their sector to focus on the main battle. "Chen, what are we actually doing?" asked Jormalik, the most junior member of the squadron. His voice carried genuine curiosity rather than hostility. "We're making the enemy think we're beaten," Marcus replied. "When predators think their prey is helpless, they get overconfident. That's when they make mistakes." The second phase required delicate coordination with civilian elements in the target area. Standard Drachmarie doctrine viewed civilians as obstacles to be protected or avoided, but Marcus saw them as potential assets. He established contact with local resistance cells and began coordinating a simultaneous uprising that would create chaos in the enemy's rear areas. His squad mates watched in amazement as their supposedly inferior human commander orchestrated a complex web of deception and misdirection. Marcus seemed to anticipate the enemy's responses at every turn, staying one step ahead of the AI's adaptive algorithms. "How did you know they would reinforce Sector 7? Asked Coirantha, her earlier hostility replaced by professional curiosity. "Because that's what I would do in their position," Marcus replied. "Sometimes the best way to understand your enemy is to think like them, not just fight them." The final phase was the most dangerous. Marcus had positioned Zeta 7 for a surgical strike on the enemy command center while Alpha and Beta squadrons maintained their frontal assault. Success depended on split-second timing and absolute trust between squadron members. As they approached the target, Marcus found himself thinking about his life before the academy. Growing up as an orphan on New Terra had taught him that survival often required thinking differently than everyone else expected. The strong didn't always win, sometimes victory belonged to those who understood the game better than their opponents. "All units, prepare for final approach," Marcus commanded. "Remember, we go in fast, hit hard, and get out before they can respond. Trust your training and trust each other." For the first time since arriving at Drakmor Academy, Marcus felt like he truly belonged. His squad mates were responding to his commands with professional efficiency, their earlier prejudices temporarily set aside in favor of mission success. Whatever happened next, they were facing it together as a team. The enemy command center loomed ahead, its defenses formidable but not insurmountable. Marcus studied the tactical displays one final time, checking and rechecking his calculations. Everything depended on the next few minutes. "Zeta 7, he said quietly into the calm, "let's show them what we can do." The command center's shields flared as Squadron Zeta 7 began their approach. Marcus watched the defensive patterns shift and adapt, the enemy AI analyzing their attack vector and deploying countermeasures with mechanical precision. But, this time, he was ready for the adaptation. "Jormalik, execute pattern Delta 7, Marcus commanded. "Coirantha, I need you to create a sensor shadow at Mark 447. Make it look like engine failure." His squad mates responded without hesitation, their movements precise despite the complexity of the maneuver. Jormalik's fighter spiraled away from the formation in what appeared to be an uncontrolled tumble, while Coirantha's ship began emitting the electromagnetic signature of a damaged drive system. The enemy AI took the bait immediately, redirecting defensive fire toward what it perceived as disabled targets. In that crucial moment of distraction, Marcus led the remaining three fighters through a gap in the defensive grid that should have been impossible to penetrate. "Incredible," whispered Zexthal over the comm despite his earlier hostility, even he couldn't deny the brilliance of Marcus's tactical approach. "How did you calculate those firing patterns?" "I didn't," Marcus replied, his fingers dancing across the control interface as he guided his fighter through the maze of defensive installations. "I watched how the AI thinks and gave it what it expected to see." The command center's inner defenses activated as they breached the perimeter. Automated turrets swiveled to track their movement, while defensive drones swarmed out to intercept them. Marcus felt his heart racing as enemy fire lit up the space around his cockpit, but his mind remained focused on the mission. "Velkar, Thanos, break left and draw their attention," he ordered. "I need 30 seconds to reach the primary target." The two Drakmari nobles, who had barely acknowledged Marcus's existence weeks earlier, now followed his commands without question. They peeled away from the formation in perfect synchronization, their weapons blazing as they engaged the drone swarm. Marcus pushed his fighter to maximum acceleration, racing toward the command center's central spire. The building's architecture was typical Drakmari design, all flowing curves and organic shapes that emphasized beauty over pure functionality. But Marcus had studied the blueprints carefully and knew exactly where to strike for maximum effect. His targeting system locked onto a seemingly minor support structure near the base of the spire. To Drakmari eyes, it would appear to be an aesthetic element, decorative rather than functional. But Marcus had learned to see past surface appearances during his years in New Terra's slums. "Target acquired," he announced. "All units, prepare for shock wave." The plasma torpedo struck its target with devastating precision. The support structure collapsed inward, triggering a cascade failure that brought down the entire defensive grid. Within seconds, the command center's shields flickered and died, leaving it vulnerable to the main assault forces. Zeta-7, this is Alpha Leader, came an amazed voice over the comm. How did you know that was a critical node? Lucky guess, Marcus replied, though luck had nothing to do with it. He had spent hours studying structural engineering principles, learning how different species approached building design. The Drachmary tendency to hide functional elements within decorative frameworks was a cultural blind spot that most dragon warriors never thought to exploit. The simulation ended with complete success. Alpha and Beta squadrons swept through the defenseless command center while Zeta-7 covered their withdrawal. Total casualties were less than 5%, compared to the projected 30% loss rate for a conventional assault. As the tactical displays faded, Marcus found himself surrounded by his squadmates. Their expressions were complex mixtures of respect, confusion, and something that might have been embarrassment. For weeks they had dismissed him as inferior, yet he had just demonstrated tactical brilliance that exceeded their own capabilities. Captain Valterra approached the group, her stride purposeful and her expression unreadable. She stopped directly in front of Marcus and studied him for several long moments before speaking. "Explain how you identified the structural weakness," she demanded. Marcus straightened to attention. The Drachmary architectural philosophy emphasizes integration between form and function, ma'am. What appears decorative often serves essential purposes. I studied the blueprints and identified load-bearing elements that were disguised as aesthetic features. And the coordination with civilian resistance elements? Human military doctrine includes irregular warfare principles, ma'am. Sometimes non-military assets can provide strategic advantages that conventional forces cannot achieve alone. Valterra nodded slowly. Your approach challenges fundamental assumptions about combat command. Most of your tactics would be considered unconventional by Drachmary standards. Yes, ma'am. Do you consider this a weakness in our military doctrine? The question was clearly a test, and Marcus could feel his squadmates' attention focusing on his response. Criticizing Drachmary military traditions would be seen as arrogant presumption, but giving a dishonest answer would be worse. Not a weakness, ma'am, Marcus said carefully. Different approaches. Drachmary tactics emphasize honor, courage, and direct confrontation. Those are valuable qualities that have built a successful empire. But every approach has limitations when facing adaptive enemies. And you believe human approaches can address those limitations? I think diversity of thought strengthens any organization, ma'am. When everyone thinks the same way, you become predictable. Predictable forces lose to adaptive ones. Captain Valterra's expression remained neutral, but Marcus caught a brief flicker of what might have been approval in her eyes. She turned to address the entire squadron. Your next assignment will be individual command evaluations. Each of you will be given a separate tactical scenario to resolve independently. Your performance will determine your final placement within the Academy hierarchy. The announcement sent a chill through the group. Individual evaluations were where careers were made or destroyed at Drachmore Academy. Success meant advancement to senior training programs and eventual fleet command positions. Failure meant relegation to support roles or outright dismissal. Over the following days, Marcus threw himself into preparation with desperate intensity. His success in the group exercise had earned him respect from his squadmates, but he knew that respect was fragile. If he failed his individual evaluation, all the progress he had made would be meaningless. The Academy's vast library became his second home. He studied historical battles from across the galaxy, analyzing the tactics and strategies that had shaped the course of interstellar civilization. Drachmary victories, certainly, but also defeats and the lessons they contained. More importantly, he researched conflicts involving other species, looking for patterns and principles that might apply to his own challenges. Still here, Chen? Jormalik found him hunched over a tactical display in the library's main reading room well past midnight. The young Drachmary had been increasingly friendly since the successful mission, treating Marcus more like an equal than a curiosity. Couldn't sleep, Marcus admitted. Keep thinking about the evaluation scenarios. Jormalik settled into a nearby chair, his movements careful not to disturb other late-night studiers. "You know, I've been thinking about what happened during the exercise. The way you saw patterns that none of us caught." "Different perspective," Marcus said. "Sometimes being an outsider helps." "Maybe. But I think it's more than that." Jormalik leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "My family has served in the Dragon Fleet for 12 generations. We have tactical manuals that go back centuries, battle plans that have been refined through countless conflicts. But all of them assume certain things about how enemies will behave." Marcus nodded. "What kind of assumptions?" "That they'll fight with honor. That they'll follow logical tactical principles. That they'll respond to superior force with either submission or direct resistance." Jormalik paused, choosing his words carefully. "But what if they don't? What if an enemy fights in ways that our traditions can't account for?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus could see that Jormalik was wrestling with concepts that challenged his fundamental worldview. For a species raised on military tradition and cultural superiority, the idea that their methods might be insufficient was profoundly disturbing. "That's what happened with the simulation AI," Marcus said quietly. "It wasn't bound by honor or tradition. It could use whatever methods were most effective, regardless of whether they were considered proper warfare." "Exactly. And you understood that in a way that none of us could." Jormalik's expression was troubled. "It makes me wonder what else we might be missing." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Kyrantha, who approached their table with obvious hesitation. The silver-scaled female had been among Marcus's harshest critics during the early weeks, making no secret of her belief that humans had no place at Drakmor Academy. "Cadet Chen," she said formally, "I wanted to speak with you about the upcoming evaluations." Marcus looked up from his study materials, unsure what to expect. Kyrantha's tone was neutral, but her body language suggested internal conflict. "What about them?" "I have been reconsidering some of my previous opinions," she said stiffly. "Your performance during the exercise demonstrated capabilities that I had not expected. I wanted to apologize for my earlier behavior." The apology was clearly difficult for her to make, and Marcus could see the effort it required. In Drakmari culture, admitting error was considered a sign of weakness, especially when dealing with beings from supposedly inferior species. "Thank you," Marcus replied simply. "But you don't owe me an apology. We all had to learn to work together." "Perhaps. But I let pride interfere with tactical efficiency. That is unworthy of a future fleet commander." Kyrantha straightened her shoulders. "I wanted you to know that you have my respect, regardless of what happens in the individual evaluations." After she left, Jormalik shook his head in amazement. "Do you realize what just happened? Kyrantha comes from one of the oldest noble houses in the Empire. Her family has never acknowledged equality with any non-Drakmari species." Marcus felt a strange mixture of pride and sadness. He was glad to have earned his squadmates' respect, but he wondered what it meant for the broader relationship between humans and Drakmari. Would his success be seen as proof that humans could be valuable allies, or as a threatening anomaly that needed to be contained? The individual evaluation day arrived with typical Drakmari ceremony. Each cadet was assigned a private simulation chamber where they would face a unique tactical scenario designed to test their command potential. The scenarios were generated randomly to prevent preparation or collaboration, ensuring that success depended entirely on individual merit. Marcus entered his assigned chamber to find Captain Velterra waiting for him. The simulation environment was stark and utilitarian, containing only a command interface and holographic displays showing star charts and fleet positions. "Your scenario," Velterra announced, "involves first contact with an unknown alien species. Initial diplomatic exchanges have broken down, and their fleet is advancing on a colony world with 2 million Drakmari civilians. You have a small task force under your command and limited time to resolve the situation." The tactical display activated, showing the scenario in detail. Marcus studied the positions carefully, noting the relative strengths of the forces involved. The alien fleet significantly outnumbered his own, and their technology appeared to be roughly equivalent to Drakmari standards. A direct confrontation would likely result in heavy casualties on both sides, with no guarantee of protecting the civilian population.
Additional parameters, Valterra continued.
The alien species appears to be highly territorial but shows no signs of expansion beyond this system.
Their initial diplomatic communications suggested they view the Drachmarie colony as a territorial violation rather than an act of war.
Marcus nodded, beginning to see the shape of the problem. This wasn't really a military scenario, it was a test of diplomatic and strategic thinking under extreme pressure. The obvious solution would be to evacuate the civilians and cede the system to the aliens, but that would represent a significant political defeat for the Drachmarie Empire.
Time limit, he asked. 6 hours simulation time.
The alien fleet will reach the colony in 4 hours, and civilian evacuation would require 8 hours minimum. Marcus began working through his options methodically.
Direct confrontation was clearly out of the question given the force disparity. Evacuation was impossible within the time constraints. That left negotiation or some form of strategic misdirection as the only viable approaches.
He pulled up detailed scans of the alien fleet, looking for clues about their tactical doctrine and cultural priorities. The ship formations suggested a highly organized society with strong emphasis on collective action. Their communication protocols showed complex hierarchical structures similar to those found in eusocial insect species.
Interesting, Marcus murmured, an idea beginning to form. Cadet?
I need to open a communication channel with the alien fleet, Marcus announced. But not to their military commanders. I want to speak with their equivalent of civilian leadership. Captain Valterra raised an eyebrow but activated the requested channel. The alien response was immediate and hostile, demanding immediate withdrawal from their territorial space. Marcus listened carefully to the communication patterns, analyzing not just the words but the underlying emotional resonance. Honored ones, Marcus began, using a formal address pattern he hoped would resonate with their hierarchical culture. I am Marcus Chen, speaking for the Drachmarie colony on your world. We wish to discuss the territorial dispute that has brought us to this unfortunate confrontation. The alien response was sharp and aggressive, but Marcus noticed something important in the subtext. Their language patterns suggested frustration rather than pure hostility. They genuinely believed the Drachmarie had violated their territorial rights, but they seemed more interested in resolving the violation than in destroying the colony outright. We understand that our presence offends you, Marcus continued. But, before blood is shed, might we discuss the nature of this territorial claim? Our colonists were unaware that this system was claimed by your people. What followed was a complex diplomatic exchange that tested every lesson Marcus had learned about alien psychology and interspecies communication. The aliens, who called themselves the Hydmar, explained that the star system contained breeding grounds essential to their species' reproductive cycle. The Drachmarie colony, while small, had disrupted migration patterns that the Hydmar had followed for thousands of years. Marcus realized this was exactly the kind of problem that traditional Drachmarie diplomacy would struggle to address. Dragon culture emphasized strength and territorial dominance, making it difficult for them to acknowledge legitimate claims from supposedly inferior species. But human diplomatic traditions included concepts of environmental stewardship and shared resource management that might offer alternative solutions.
What if we could restore the migration patterns while maintaining the colony?
Marcus proposed. Our terraforming technology might be able to create artificial breeding grounds that would serve your needs while allowing both species to coexist. The suggestion sparked intense discussion among the Hydmar fleet commanders. Marcus could hear multiple voices debating the proposal through the translation software, their tones shifting from hostility to curiosity. Finally, their primary spokesperson responded.
This possibility has merit. But, how can we trust beings who invaded our space without permission?
Marcus took a deep breath, recognizing this as the crucial moment of the negotiation.
Trust between alien species was always fragile, especially after territorial violations had occurred.
But humans had learned something important during their own troubled history. Sometimes trust had to begin with one side taking a significant risk. As a gesture of good faith, Marcus announced, I am ordering my fleet to withdraw beyond the system's outer marker. We will remain within communication range but will not approach your breeding grounds. This will give your specialists time to examine our terraforming proposals without feeling threatened by our military presence. Captain Valterra's eyes widened at this declaration. Withdrawing in the face of an enemy fleet went against every principle of Drakmari military doctrine. If the simulation was being monitored by other instructors, Marcus had just committed what would be seen as an act of cowardice. But the effect on the Hivemar was immediate and dramatic. The hostile edge disappeared from their communications, replaced by what Marcus interpreted as surprised respect. No species in their experience had ever voluntarily withdrawn from a position of relative strength as an act of diplomacy. "Your gesture is unexpected," the Hivemar spokesperson admitted. "We will examine your proposals with the seriousness they deserve." The next several hours of simulation time involved detailed technical discussions between Hivemar biologists and human terraforming experts. Marcus coordinated the exchange while maintaining his fleet at the agreed-upon distance, resisting the urge to move closer despite the obvious tactical vulnerability of his position. Gradually, a workable solution emerged. The humans could create artificial reef structures that would replicate the natural breeding conditions the Hivemar required, while the existing colony would be relocated to a different part of the planet that didn't interfere with migration routes. Both species would benefit from shared research into planetary ecosystem management. When the simulation ended, Marcus found himself face to face with Captain Valterra and two other senior instructors he didn't recognize. Their expressions were difficult to read, but he could sense intense discussion happening through private communication channels. "Cadet Chen," Valterra said finally. "Your solution to the scenario was unconventional." "Yes, ma'am. You voluntarily withdrew from a position of tactical advantage. By traditional standards, this could be interpreted as cowardice in the face of the enemy." Marcus felt his stomach clench. Had his risk-taking backfired? Had he demonstrated exactly the kind of human weakness that his critics expected? However, Valterra continued, "Your approach achieved the primary mission objectives with zero casualties and established the foundation for a beneficial long-term relationship with a new species. These results are difficult to argue with." One of the other instructors, a massive Drakmari with deep blue scales and ancient battle scars, stepped forward. Marcus recognized him as Admiral Kefvar, the Academy's supreme commander. "Young human," the Admiral said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of military authority. "Your tactics challenge fundamental assumptions about command and leadership. Some would say you have shown weakness where strength was required." Marcus straightened to attention, preparing for whatever judgment was about to fall. "Others," the Admiral continued, "would say you have demonstrated wisdom beyond your years. The ability to achieve victory without bloodshed is perhaps the highest form of military art." The Admiral studied Marcus with eyes that had witnessed countless battles across the galaxy. "Tell me, Cadet, do you believe your human perspective gives you advantages that Drakmari commanders lack?" The question was clearly another test, and Marcus knew his answer would determine his future at the Academy. He thought about his squadmates, who had come to respect him despite their initial prejudices. He thought about the complex challenges facing the Drakmari Empire as it encountered increasingly diverse alien civilizations. "I think diversity of thought strengthens any organization, sir," Marcus replied carefully. "Humans and Drakmari have different strengths. Combining those strengths might help us face challenges that neither species could handle alone." Admiral Kefvar nodded slowly. "An interesting perspective. We shall see if events prove you correct." The weeks following the individual evaluations brought an unexpected change in atmosphere at Drakmar Academy. Marcus found himself approached by cadets from other squadrons, all curious about the human who had reportedly solved an impossible diplomatic scenario. Some came with genuine interest in his tactical methods, while others seemed more interested in understanding what they saw as an alien mindset. Marcus tried to remain humble about his success, but it was impossible to ignore the shift in how others perceived him. Instructors who had previously barely acknowledged his existence now included him in advanced tactical seminars. His squadmates, once reluctant to associate with him, now sought his input on their own training exercises. The most significant change came in the form of a new assignment. Admiral Kefvar personally summoned Marcus to his private office, an honor typically reserved for graduating cadets being offered prestigious fleet positions. The Admiral's office occupied the highest spire of the Academy, with panoramic windows offering views across the Drakmari homeworld's capital city. Ancient battle standards hung from the walls, each representing a famous victory in the Empire's long military history. Marcus felt small and out of place among such legendary artifacts. "Sit," Admiral Kethvar commanded, gesturing to a chair that had clearly been designed for Drakmari physiology. Marcus perched uncomfortably on the edge, trying to maintain proper military posture despite the awkward fit. "Your evaluation results have created considerable discussion among the faculty," the Admiral began without preamble. "Your tactical scores rank in the top 5% of all cadets in Academy history. Your diplomatic approach demonstrates understanding of interspecies psychology that exceeds most of our senior officers." Marcus remained silent, unsure whether this was praise or criticism. However, the Admiral continued, "Your methods consistently challenge traditional Drakmari military doctrine. Some instructors question whether your approach represents innovation or dangerous departure from proven principles. I understand their concerns, sir. Do you? Because I am not certain that you fully grasp the implications of your position here." Admiral Kethvar leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the desk. "You are not just a cadet, Chen. You are a symbol. Your success or failure will influence how the Empire views humanity's role in our military structures." The weight of that responsibility settled on Marcus like a physical burden. He had been so focused on proving himself worthy of his place at the Academy that he hadn't considered the broader political implications of his presence. "That is why," the Admiral announced, "you will be participating in a special advanced training program. Along with selected cadets from the senior class, you will be given temporary command of actual military vessels for a series of real-world exercises." Marcus felt his blood turn cold. Real ships meant real consequences. The simulations had been safe environments where failure meant embarrassment and poor grades. Commanding actual Drakmari military vessels would involve genuine risk to lives and equipment. "Sir, I'm still a junior cadet." "Surely there are more qualified." "There are," Admiral Kethvar interrupted. "But qualification is not the only consideration. The Empire faces new challenges that traditional approaches may not be able to address. Recent intelligence reports suggest that several hostile forces are developing tactics specifically designed to counter Drakmari military doctrine." The Admiral activated a holographic display showing star charts marked with threat assessments. Marcus recognized several systems near the Empire's border regions, areas where first contact situations were becoming increasingly common. The Convergence Machine Intelligence has begun adapting its strategies based on captured Drakmari tactical databases, the Admiral explained. The hive minds of the Outer Rim have developed new coordination methods that exploit our reliance on honor-based combat protocols. Even pirate organizations have learned to use our own principles against us. Marcus studied the threat patterns, beginning to understand the scope of the challenge facing the Drakmari Empire. Their military success had been built on consistent tactical doctrines refined over centuries of conflict. But that same consistency had become a weakness when facing truly adaptive enemies. "You believe human tactical approaches might help address these problems?" "I believe diversity of thought strengthens any organization," Admiral Kethvar replied, using Marcus's own words from the evaluation. "Your species has demonstrated remarkable adaptability throughout your history. Perhaps it is time for the Dragon Fleet to learn some of that flexibility." The special training program began immediately. Marcus found himself assigned to a mixed crew of senior cadets and experienced officers aboard the DFS Talon's Edge, a fast cruiser designed for reconnaissance and rapid response missions. The ship was smaller than the massive dreadnoughts that formed the backbone of the Dragon Fleet, but it represented cutting-edge technology and sophisticated tactical systems. Captain Zalthek, the vessel's permanent commander, greeted Marcus with professional courtesy tinged by obvious skepticism. The scarred veteran had spent decades commanding Drakmari warships according to traditional principles, and the idea of learning new methods from a human teenager clearly struck him as questionable judgment by the Academy leadership. "You will observe all standard protocols while aboard my ship," Captain Zalthek informed Marcus during their first meeting. "I have read your Academy records, and, while your test scores are impressive, this is not a simulation. Real ships require real discipline." "Understood, sir."
Good. Your first assignment will be tactical analysis of our upcoming patrol route. We are investigating reports of unusual activity in the Kethmore system, possibly involving convergence reconnaissance probes. Marcus threw himself into the assignment with characteristic intensity.
The Kethmore system sat at the intersection of several major hyperspace routes, making it strategically valuable for trade and military movement. Recent sensor readings suggested the presence of artificial objects that didn't match any known ship configurations. As he studied the intelligence reports, Marcus began to notice patterns that seemed familiar. The mysterious objects appeared and disappeared according to schedules that suggested systematic surveillance rather than random exploration. Their movement patterns indicated coordination between multiple units, but the coordination followed algorithms rather than organic tactical thinking. "Captain," Marcus reported during the senior staff briefing, "I believe we're dealing with a new generation of convergence probe technology. The movement patterns match machine intelligence optimization protocols, but they're more sophisticated than previous encounters." Captain Zalthek examined Marcus's analysis with careful attention. The data correlation was thorough and professionally presented, but the conclusions challenged some fundamental assumptions about convergence capabilities. These probes would require processing power far beyond what we've seen from previous convergence units, observed Commander Lilas, the ship's senior tactical officer. "Our intelligence assessments indicate they lack the technology for such advanced coordination. Unless they've been learning from captured Drachmarie systems," Marcus suggested. "The convergence is designed to adapt and evolve. If they've had access to our tactical databases, they might have developed new capabilities based on our own military principles." The possibility was disturbing. The convergence machine intelligence had been contained through superior Drachmarie technology and tactical doctrine for decades. If they had found ways to turn those advantages against their creators, the strategic balance in that region of space could shift dramatically. "Recommend course of action?" Captain Zalthek asked. Marcus took a deep breath, knowing his answer would be tested under real conditions rather than simulation parameters. "I think we need to approach this as a reconnaissance mission rather than a combat patrol. If these are advanced convergence units, direct confrontation could provide them with additional data about our current capabilities." "Elaborate." "We use passive sensors and stealth technology to observe their behavior patterns without revealing our presence. Once we understand their operational parameters, we can develop countermeasures that don't depend on tactics they've already studied." Captain Zalthek considered the proposal carefully. Traditional Drachmarie doctrine would favor a direct approach, locate the enemy, assess their strength, and either destroy them or call for reinforcements. Marcus's suggested approach required patience and subtlety, qualities the dragon warriors sometimes struggled to embrace. "Very well," the captain decided. "We will attempt your reconnaissance approach first. But, if the situation requires immediate action, we will revert to standard protocols." The Talon's Edge entered the Kethmore system using maximum stealth protocols, its advanced cloaking systems rendering it virtually invisible to most sensors. Marcus worked alongside the ship's sensor operators, coordinating passive scans that would gather information without betraying their presence. What they discovered exceeded their worst fears. The convergence hadn't just deployed reconnaissance probes, they had established a complete surveillance network that monitored every approach to the system. Worse, the probe units were using advanced adaptive algorithms that modified their behavior in real time based on environmental changes. "Fascinating," whispered Chief Sensor Operator Ventral as data streamed across his displays. "They're not just watching for ships. They're analyzing hyperspace fluctuations, gravitational anomalies, even stellar radiation patterns. This network could detect fleet movements weeks before they arrive in system." Marcus studied the probe deployment patterns, looking for weaknesses that might be exploited. The convergence had clearly learned from decades of conflict with Drachmarie forces, but their machine logic still followed predictable parameters. They were optimizing for efficiency and information gathering, which meant they might be vulnerable to approaches that sacrificed efficiency for unpredictability. "Captain," Marcus said quietly, "I think I see a way to disable their network without alerting them to our presence." "Explain." Marcus activated a tactical display, highlighting specific probe units within the surveillance grid. "The network depends on continuous communication between all units to maintain optimal coverage. But they're using our own communication protocols, adapted from captured Drachmarie systems.
That should make them more secure, not less.
Not if we know how to exploit the weaknesses in our own systems.
Marcus began outlining his plan, which involved using the Talon's Edge's communication equipment to inject carefully crafted interference into the probe network. We make it look like natural stellar interference rather than deliberate sabotage. The probes will adapt to compensate, but their adaptation will create gaps in their coverage. Captain Zalthek studied the plan with growing interest.
It was the kind of subtle, multi-layered approach that required deep understanding of both Drachmarie and convergence technology.
More importantly, it offered the possibility of achieving their objectives without revealing the Dragon Fleet's current capabilities to the enemy.
The risk is considerable, Captain Zalthek observed. If your interference is detected as artificial, we could find ourselves facing the entire probe network.
Yes, sir. But if we succeed, we'll have proven that the convergence can be defeated using methods they can't easily adapt to counter.
The captain made his decision.
Proceed with your plan, Cadet Chen. All departments will provide full cooperation.
What followed was the most nerve-wracking hour of Marcus's young life. Working with the ship's communication specialists, he carefully modulated the Talon's Edge's transmissions to create interference patterns that mimicked natural stellar phenomena. The effect had to be subtle enough to avoid detection while being powerful enough to disrupt the probe network's coordination. The first phase worked perfectly. Probe units throughout the system began experiencing communication difficulties that appeared to result from increased solar activity. Their adaptive algorithms responded by adjusting frequencies and power levels, trying to compensate for the apparent environmental changes. But the compensation created exactly the vulnerabilities Marcus had predicted. As the probes modified their communication protocols, gaps appeared in their surveillance coverage. Small at first, but growing larger as the adaptive algorithms continued to respond to the simulated interference.
Incredible, breathed Commander Thylas. The entire network is reorganizing itself based on false environmental data.
They're creating blind spots in their own surveillance grid. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and professional satisfaction. The plan was working, but the real test would come when they tried to exploit the gaps they had created. If the convergence units detected the Talon's Edge during their reconnaissance, the entire mission would be compromised. Initiating close approach to Probe Cluster 7, announced the ship's helmsman.
Stealth systems operating at maximum efficiency.
The Talon's Edge glided through space like a ghost, its cloaking technology rendering it invisible to most sensors. Marcus watched the tactical displays as they approached one of the larger probe units, close enough to conduct detailed scans of its technology and capabilities. What the sensors revealed was even more disturbing than their initial fears had suggested. The convergence probes weren't just using adapted Drachmarie technology, they had improved it.
Their processing capabilities exceeded current Dragonfleet standards, and their adaptive algorithms were more sophisticated than anything in the Empire's databases.
They're not just learning from captured systems, Marcus realized with growing alarm.
They're innovating.
Creating new technologies based on principles they've extracted from our military doctrine.
Captain Zalthek's expression grew grim as he reviewed the sensor data. The implications were staggering.
If the convergence could not only adapt to Drachmarie tactics but actually improve upon them, the technological superiority that the Empire had relied upon for centuries might be coming to an end.
Recommendations, Cadet?
Marcus forced himself to think beyond the immediate tactical situation. The information they had gathered was crucial for the Empire's strategic planning, but it also represented a turning point in the relationship between organic and artificial intelligence.
The convergence was evolving into something far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. We need to get this intelligence back to Fleet Command immediately, sir.
But we also need to consider that our own presence here might be providing them with additional data.
Meaning?
Every scan we take, every transmission we make, even our stealth technology, it's all generating information that their sensors might be analyzing.
We might be teaching them about our current capabilities just by being here.
The sobering thought hung in the air between them. Modern warfare increasingly involved battles of information and adaptation rather than simple firepower. In such conflicts, sometimes the greatest victory was achieved by learning about your enemy without letting them learn about you.
Initiate immediate withdrawal, Captain Zalthek ordered. All departments, prepare for emergency hyperspace jump.
As the Talon's Edge prepared to leave the system, Marcus found himself thinking about the broader implications of what they had discovered.
The convergence represented exactly the kind of adaptive enemy that traditional Drachmary tactics struggled to address.
But, perhaps more importantly, they demonstrated the value of continuous innovation and learning. The return journey to Drachmore Academy gave Marcus time to prepare his report and consider its impact on his own future. The intelligence they had gathered would undoubtedly influence the Empire's military planning for years to come. But, it also raised questions about the role that humans might play in addressing these new challenges. When they arrived at the Academy, Marcus was immediately summoned to Admiral Kethvar's office.
The Admiral listened to his report with grave attention, occasionally asking pointed questions about technical details or tactical implications.
Your analysis suggests that the Empire faces a threat that conventional approaches cannot address, the Admiral observed when Marcus finished his presentation.
Yes, sir.
The convergence is evolving beyond our ability to predict or counter using traditional methods.
And, you believe human tactical flexibility might provide advantages in such conflicts?
Marcus chose his words carefully. I think any organization benefits from diversity of thought, sir.
Humans might offer perspectives that purely Drachmary approaches would miss. But, the reverse is also true. Human methods have limitations that Drachmary expertise could address.
Admiral Kethvar studied Marcus with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across the galaxy.
You speak of collaboration rather than replacement.
Yes, sir. I don't think humans could replace Drachmary military leadership, nor would we want to. But, working together might give us capabilities that neither species could achieve alone.
The Admiral nodded slowly. An interesting perspective.
Recent events suggest that the Empire must indeed adapt to face new challenges. Perhaps it is time to explore unconventional approaches to command and leadership. Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with apprehension. He was being offered an opportunity that no human had ever received before, but he also understood the enormous responsibility that came with it. There is a new program being established, Admiral Kethvar announced. Mixed species command training, designed to develop tactical approaches that combine the strengths of multiple civilizations.
You would be among the first candidates for this program.
Sir, I'm honored, but the choice is yours, Cadet Chen. You can continue with conventional training and eventually receive a standard fleet assignment. Or you can help pioneer a new approach to interstellar military command, knowing that you will face skepticism and resistance from those who prefer traditional methods. Marcus thought about his journey from the slums of New Terra to the halls of Drachmore Academy. He remembered the loneliness of being an outsider, the struggle to prove himself worthy of respect, and the gradual recognition that his differences might actually be strengths rather than weaknesses.
I accept, sir. Admiral Kethvar's expression revealed what might have been satisfaction. Then, we begin immediately. The galaxy is changing, Cadet Chen.
It will require new kinds of leaders to navigate the challenges ahead. As Marcus left the Admiral's office, he felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. He was about to become part of something unprecedented in Drachmary culture, the integration of alien perspectives into their military command structure. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with opposition from traditionalists and the constant pressure to prove that change could be beneficial rather than dangerous. But, for the first time since arriving at Drachmore Academy, Marcus felt truly confident about his place in the universe.
He was no longer just an orphan from Earth trying to fit into Drachmary society.
He was a bridge between civilizations, helping to create something new and, potentially extraordinary. The stars called to him through the Academy's windows, and Marcus answered with determination burning in his heart. The future of the Drachmary Empire, and, perhaps the galaxy itself, would depend on whether different species could learn to work together against common threats. And, he intended to prove that they could. 6 months later, Squadron Leader Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the DFS Unity, the first mixed-species command vessel in Dragonfleet history. His crew included Drachmari, humans, and even a few members of the Hivemar species who had become allies following the successful diplomatic resolution of the territorial dispute. Sir, reported his Drachmari tactical officer, Kyrantha, who had requested transfer to serve under his command.
We're receiving distress signals from the Outer Rim. 3 colony worlds are under attack by unknown forces.
Marcus studied the tactical displays, noting the coordination and sophistication of the enemy assault. But, this time, he wasn't facing the challenge alone. His diverse crew brought perspectives and capabilities that no single species command could match. All stations, prepare for immediate response, Marcus ordered.
Let's show the galaxy what we can accomplish when we work together.
The Unity leaped into hyperspace, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of multiple civilizations united in common cause. Behind them, Drachmore Academy continued training a new generation of leaders who understood that strength came not from uniformity, but from the harmony of differences working toward shared goals. The orphan boy from New Terra had indeed found his place among the stars, and, in doing so, he had helped create a future where no one would have to face the darkness alone.